Hello everyone, K-Dub here, and in this edition of Basic Buddhism, we're going to go over the Noble Eightfold Path. Why is it called the Noble Eightfold Path? What are the aspects of the Eightfold Path, and why is it important? So let's go ahead and get the party started with and this is an important point. We can't really think of these aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path as linear. So, right view leads to right thought. That's not how the Noble Eight Path is viewed. It's viewed as interconnected with each other. And we'll discuss that more as we go on. So, we're going to start with right view, but just a sort of a reminder that these are not linear. It's sort of linear so that we can memorize it better, but not because it goes in any certain direction. So, the first aspect of I have notes. So if I'm looking over, it's because I have notes and I want to make sure I cover everything. Right view. So another sort of note while I'm doing side notes, is sama is commonly translated as right. There are some translators and some interpretations that don't use right. So they don't say right view, they say integral view or perfected view. Not perfected as in like you don't make any mistakes, but perfected as in you're very good at it. So, for example, when you start playing a sport, you're not very good, right? But you perfect your craft when it comes to that sport so that you're really good and that you don't make as many mistakes. So that's sort of what some interpretations and some translators have done. I'm going to go with the traditional viewpoint that it is right and that there is an opposing sort of wrong. But another thing you'll hear is wise view or wholesome view. Something that's not as, I don't know, when you say right view and wrong view, it sounds like someone's going to, whip you with a, get out a belt and whip you if you do something wrong. And that's not sort of the interpretation that many people take when it comes to the Noble Eightfold Path. So some people don't use that. But I'm going to say right view because it's sort of assumed that if you don't have sama in front, that's wrong. So that's what we're going to go with. So right view is the full realization of the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths are the noble truth of dukkha, the noble truth of the origin of dukkha, the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha, and finally the Noble Eightfold Path itself, which is the path of practice leading to cessation of dukkha. And I'm getting all this from the Majjhima Nikaya 141, where half of it's about the Four Noble Truths, and then it goes into detail of what the Noble Eightfold Path is. So one of the main reasons that a person has ignorance from a Buddhist perspective is not seeing the Four Noble Truths to the fullest potential that we could. We can say, well, yeah, there's dukkha and what have you, but then we decide not to really acknowledge the next three aspects of the noble truths. So we stop short of that full realization. That keeps us in the round of rebirths. The wandering of samsara is another way to sort of put that. So that is, in some, right view. There are some other interpretations. There's mundane, and then there's sort of supreme. And the supreme goes more into not only the Noble Eightfold Path, but also the operation of the law of karma, and so on and so forth. But that is a completely another video when it comes to the law of karma, because that is not as simple as some slogans make it out to be. So that's right view. Right thought is renunciation, freedom from ill will, and harmlessness. All right, so from a Buddhist perspective, renunciation, being able to put things to the side and not carrying those things around, metaphorically speaking, is considered right thought because we're actually leaving our dukkha to the side and going on a path that doesn't have dukkha or has minimal dukkha or less dukkha than what is than the path that we're taking presently. Uh, freedom from ill will, anger, and ill will is considered to be a huge hindrance in Buddhism. So to have freedom from that is right thought because then we are acting with wholesome tension. Then harmlessness, sort of similar to anger and ill will. If we are consistently wanting to injure others, that gets in the way of us achieving a peace of mind. So basically, trying not to have enemies, try not to perceive other people as our enemy. That can be difficult when it comes to the other person because they might perceive you as an enemy. But it really is on our shoulders, in my tradition at least, where we make attempts not to view others as enemies. Maybe as different, but not as enemies. All right, so right thought is renunciation, freedom from ill will, and practicing harmlessness. So, what is right speech, which is sort of the next one? Not lying, not having, not engaging in divisive speech, abusive speech, or in idle chatter. And I've gotten in trouble with the idle chatter one before. So, if you want to do the positive, so not lying is being truthful, and to the to the highest degree, it's being truthful all the time. And there are some gray areas there. What if you believe someone is trying to harm someone else? Do you tell them the whole truth? And that sort of is a gray area where we got to figure it out on our own and be like, okay, if I do make an attempt at telling the truth here, will another being be? And so we got to sort of determine what is the correct course of action at that moment. Avoiding divisive speech. So the Buddha, there is a sutta that I can't tell you off the top of my head which one it is, where the Buddha says we basically that we want to have concord within our communities. We want people to get along. We want people to be happy for each other. And divisive speech doesn't lead to that. And that's the same thing with abusive speech. That doesn't lead to concord and unity, that leads to division. And unfortunately, here in the United States where I live, we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of divisive speech and a lot of abusive speech. And that's not bringing us together. That's dividing us. That's making us feel like we have a lot of enemies. And we're all in this together. Uh, and unfortunately, when we have that sort of division, it's difficult to see that. And then there's idle chatter. So I've gotten in trouble with idle chatter before. I went to a service on a college campus and I said, "Wow, there's an awful lot of idle chatter going on." And the person that was in charge of that really didn't say very much, but he and I still are in contact with each other. And he said he wanted to tell me to f off, which he's right. We are not monks. Idle chatter is basically gossiping, and as a layperson, it's difficult not to gossip. We want to talk about things that we think are occurring, but as a monk, idle chatter is pretty it's pretty frowned upon. So you want to be talking about something that's on the path. So um, I I don't have a complete understanding of the three poisons, for example. Could you try and discuss this with me so that maybe I have a better understanding? That would be considered wise chatter because it is related to the teachings. Idle chatter would be are have you been keeping track of the Ukraine invasion slash war? For a monk, that's more of a worldly affair. And as a monk, you're trying to achieve the deathless element, Nibbana, and so you want to talk about things that are leading you there, not necessarily things that are going to keep you sidetracked. And then we have right action, not taking life, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So those are three of the training precepts out of five that a layperson usually takes. So not taking life, there's definitely gray areas there. What if you are defending your family? That becomes a gray area where possibly that is permissible. It's not going to be right, it's not going to be wrong, but it's going to be permissible. And it also depends on your intention. Do you really want to hurt that person? Are you taking that action out of greed for protecting your family? Are you taking out of compassion because you don't want the other person to accumulate bad karma. And it's very difficult in that moment to understand what our intentions are because we're taking in that stimuli and we're basically reacting to it. Abstaining from stealing is another one. So if someone says you can take this anytime you want, like paper clips when I was a teaching assistant, that's permissible. However, if I don't ask to use something, that could be considered stealing. And even if I return it, I stole it for a certain amount of time. So it can vary based upon the situation, and there may be situations like in National Treasure where I'm stealing the Declaration of Independence so someone else doesn't steal it. That's sort of like a permissible area, and once again, we have to get into intention when it comes to that. Sexual misconduct in the old days was, well, from a traditional viewpoint of Theravada, was, and I'm summarizing here, so it may not be 100% correct, having sex relations with a woman who's otherwise protected by family, another man, or the state. And so here in the United States now, if a woman lives with her parents but is a consenting adult, that's that's legal. I mean, not many people would be like, well, that's a huge deal. Uh, from a sort of traditional Buddhist perspective, I would consider that sort of a gray area. I would consider it to be one of those in Rome, do as the Romans do type situations, because that may not be doing any harm whatsoever, especially if they're consenting adults and the woman and the man are both not married or otherwise engaged in another relationship. So I think that's sort of all of those have sort of like gray areas. But when it comes to if you're a monk, not taking life is essential. Not stealing is essential. Sexual misconduct, it doesn't happen. You could get expelled from the order for engaging in those actions. There's a whole sort of text about what disciplinary actions are taken that I'm not really familiar with. It's called the Vinaya, which is sort of like the rules. All right, so that's sort of an overview of right action. What's right livelihood? So this is important as a layperson. Abstaining from trades in meat, weapons, poisons, living beings, and intoxicants. So let's go over that for a second. Trading in meats, don't become a butcher, for example. Trading in weapons, don't be an arms dealer. Poisons, don't trade in rat poison, what have you. Living beings, that's slavery, sex trafficking, that type of stuff. Stuff that's not legal anyway here in the United States, but from a Buddhist perspective, it's considered very repulsive. And then intoxicants, so don't sell alcohol or other intoxicants. Um, and once again, alcohol is sort of ingrained culturally. So, but at the same time, I would be pretty conservative in my interpretation there and say, yeah, I'm not gonna be a bartender, or I'm not gonna be in a play, or I'm not gonna handle alcohol in a place that sells alcohol. So I'm not putting it on the shelves. And then, if you're a cashier, that becomes even more of a gray area because obviously they need to pay for the alcohol. So do I do that or don't I do that? It's sort of a tricky question. So that is sort of from a layperson's perspective. From a monk's perspective, it's those things and avoiding palm reading, interpreting celestial events, forecasting or prophesizing weather, wars, engaging in poetry, demonology, blah 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 blah. It's a very long list that I don't need to memorize right now, but I may consider in the future if I do become a monk. And that's basically because your livelihood is taking you away from the goal of of nirvana. So we everything is sort of geared toward reaching that goal. All right, and then there's right effort, the non-arising of unwholesome qualities. So unwholesome mindsets and actions, they're going to happen, but right effort is sort of preventing those from happening and also abandoning unwholesome qualities that are already arisen. So if I am aware that I am angry, that I'm going to say something I'm going to regret, being able to take a deep breath and say, okay, stop, think before you speak here. Is this leading you toward the goal? Is this leading you toward peace of mind? You might think, well, yeah, because I'm going to feel better, but may not actually work out that way. It may actually make the other person or other party angry, and then you have more problems. Um, and then preventing those unwholesome states from occurring in the future. When I get angry, what should I do? I should view things X, Y, and Z. I should contemplate egolessness, for example, could be a possible strategy. And also, working toward the arising of wholesome states, loving kindness, compassion, maintaining and persisting wholesome states that already arise. So, maintaining that loving kindness, maintaining that compassion toward that is sort of how right effort sort of works. And I was watching a Dharma talk on right effort, and it was taught, and the presenter was Jack Cornfield, and he was presenting it more from a holistic perspective. But when it comes to the text, that's what right effort is. That is working to prevent unwholesome qualities, abandoning unwholesome qualities when they arise, um, trying to make come to fruition wholesome states, and maintaining persisting those wholesome states. And then next up, we have right mindfulness. So focusing on the body, on feelings, of mind states, of mental qualities, and focusing on those things in and of themselves. Putting us, and here's a good one, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, which means not clinging to those things, especially to the world. Now, the right concentration there's actually a whole sutta devoted to right mindfulness. I just don't remember what it is off the top of my head. And it talks about when you're focusing on the body in and of itself, starting with um, a certain body part and then working toward the whole body. Uh, and the same thing with feeling, mind states, and mental qualities. So right concentration is funky when it comes to from a text perspective. It's funky because it's you sort of try to memorize these four jhanas, which are deeper and deeper states of concentration. And so right concentration is achieving those four jhanas. And instead of trying to summarize it, I'm just going to read what the sutta says so that I don't completely 100% miss the point here. So, what is right concentration? Withdrawn from sensuality, withdrawn from unskillful qualities, one enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. The distilling of directed thoughts and evaluations, he enters and remains in the second jhana. It can also be a she, by the way. Rapture and pleasure born of composure, unification of awareness, free from directed thought and evaluation. So, directed thought and evaluation, everything else, yes. Internal assurance. With the fading of rapture, the person remains eg- I'm not going to be able to say this. Equanimous, otherwise in a state of equanimity, mindful and alert, and senses pleasure with the body. So that's the third jhana. Enters and remains in a journey, and it says, enters and remains in the third jhana, of which no one's declare. Equanimous and mindful, the person has a pleasant abiding. I'm putting in the person because it says he, but um, I am perfectly willing to admit that I think women can achieve awakening. So that's why I'm saying that. But the abandoning of pleasure and pain, as with the earlier disappearance of elation and stress, so we have more of these things getting chopped off, more of these qualities. They enter and remain in the fourth jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. This is called right concentration. So achieving those four jhanas and be able to maintain those four jhanas in a meditative state is considered right concentration or right meditation. Now, I mentioned that we can't really think of these uh, Eightfold Path factors in isolation because they interact with each other. It's very difficult to have peace of mind if you live a life that doesn't align with, say, right action and right livelihood. It's very, very difficult. That doesn't bring us the peace of mind that's sort of required when it comes to a Buddhist practice. At least that's what the argument is. You can probably be apathetic toward it and say, whatever, man, I'm going to meditate anyway, and I'm going to be at this higher state of awareness. and what have you. You could probably do that, but from a Buddhist perspective, all of these things sort of work together. Right view and right thought, for example, sort of sets the stage for right mindfulness and right concentration, because you have this realization of Four Noble Truths that helps you along the way. And then your thoughts or intentions are toward renunciation, freedom from ill will and harmlessness allows better concentration. And same thing with, right action, right livelihood, and right effort. That's sort of like the morality or the virtue part of the Noble Eightfold Path, and those make it easier to engage with right view and right thought as well as mindfulness. So they all sort of interlink with each other. You can say, I'm going to work on right intention. I want to have more of a mindset of renunciation, and so that will not only improve right thought, but all the other factors as well to a greater or lesser degree. So why is the Noble Eightfold Path called the Noble Eightfold Path? So it's not just called the regular Eightfold Path because there is that noble goal toward it. So from a Buddhist perspective, the noble goal is to awakening, to nirvana, and all that jazz. And so this is the path that leads to that goal, which is what the fourth noble truth basically says anyway. It's the path of practice leading to cessation of dukkha. And dukkha is often the thing that gets in the way of uh, completely walking down that path. And I think, it's sort of implied all the way through this talk here. Why is it important? If there is no noble eightfold path, there is no path to the cessation of dukkha, and that is what Buddhism is all about looking at dukkha, the origin of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and then finally going on that path that leads to the cessation of dukkha. So if there is no noble eightfold path, say the Buddha never really thought of it and never really taught it, then we're sort of at a loss. It's like, okay, there is a path to the cessation of dukkha, but no one's told us what it is. There's no guidance. So I think that's why ultimately it's so important. If we didn't have that, we'd just be wandering around in samsara looking for it. And this is also something that I find that's a little bit different than some other world religions. Often, the path is not systematically laid out the way that the Noble Eightfold Path is laid out. There are guidelines, certainly, and I would argue that these are guidelines as well. You have free will to say, I am not going to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. It's just that you will not reach that sort of goal that is laid out, at least if that's what you believe. Truly believe that Nirvana is achievable, that the texts are legitimate, then the Noble Eightfold Path has to be legitimate, and you pretty much have to follow it in order to get to that goal. So it's very systematic. Um, Clinical would be another word that one of my professors would. It's very laid out here. It says, look, here's the path, walk it, and then you have to make that choice to walk it. It says in the Dhammapada that the Buddhas only point the way; we must walk the path ourselves. So there are certain guidelines in other faiths. Be more like Christ, for example, is sort of like the general guideline of the path that one probably should take for that particular faith. But I would argue that it's not as systematic, it's not as clinical as the Noble Eightfold Path. And also, it's very much centered on our own sort of experiences, not centered upon a savior or a god. It's more centered on the human condition itself. At least that's what I would say my opinion is. I'm not going to state it as a fact because, let's face it, I don't know everything. All right, so that is the Noble Eightfold Path. I think probably what I want to do next is go through the 5 training precepts of abstaining from killing living beings, from taking what is not freely given, from sexual misconduct, from false speech, and from intoxicants, and sort of describe why those are important for a practicing Buddhist such as myself. So until the next recording, everyone, take care of yourselves. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.